So during DragonCon 2015, the Crafticus, senior game designer at Blizzard Entertainment, revealed a few interesting things about the upcoming expansion, Legion. To me, the most interesting of these pieces of information was the news that Multistrike is being flat out removed. This immediately rang alarm bells for me because the Elemental Shaman, the class and spec that I know the best, relies entirely upon Multistrike to be competitive, and even with its bonuses to Multistrike and Multistrike damage, it still suffers from being on the weaker end in PvE and being near useless in PvP. So what does the removal of Multistrike mean for Elemental Shaman? Well, I want to go over a few potential scenarios, these are my ideas, just in my head, stuff that could happen. So, scenario number 1. This is probably going to be the least exciting of the scenarios. The Elemental Shaman just regain their old mastery, which allows them to duplicate their spells, or they'll gain some kind of a passive ability to this effect. This is the least exciting for several reasons. Well, first of all, it would be a step backwards in design ideas, reverting the Elemental Shaman back to its state in Mists of Pandaria. Granted, it was very strong late Mists of Pandaria, but that wasn't entirely due to its mastery. Secondly, it would remove the current mastery, Molten Earth. Unless they found a way to merge the two together, this would be less exciting and mechanically dangerous, as Molten Earth contributes a significant amount of damage during a fight. Third, it would be a waste of an opportunity to redesign a class that, in my eyes at least, does need a good looking at. So I'd say this is fairly unlikely, but stranger things have happened. Scenario number 2. The Elemental Shaman loses Multistrike, and the class isn't compensated for it in the slightest. This is the most depressing scenario, as it would relegate the Elemental from being weak to simply being useless. There are arguments to be made that Elemental can hold its own in PvE right now. Once you get your tier bonuses and your class trinket, you can be somewhat competitive in terms of damage output, but removing Multistrike without compensating would entirely butcher the specialization, no question. Were I a pessimistic person, I would lend this theory credence, but I honestly don't think this is going to happen. If it does, I may have to stab someone, but like I said, I would be surprised. Scenario number 3. The Elemental Shaman receives some tweaks in design to compensate for the removal of Multistrike. Not an overhaul, just some tweaks. The most obvious change here would be damage increases across the board. Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Earthquake, Flame Shock, Earth Shock, everything like that would just need to be bumped up in order to compensate for the removal of their ability to Multistrike. Depending on how the numbers are changed, this could either make the Elemental Shaman overpowered as hell, leave it where it is, or make it even weaker. This is why I think it's a bit risky to just compensate by increasing the power of spells. Not to mention that multi-striking is what the Elemental Shaman does, you know? It's one of their most signature abilities. Just flat out increasing the damage of our spells would leave the class playing very slowly, I feel. Basically, it would play how a Shaman in low gear plays now, barely seeing any multi-strikes and casting spells really slowly. I don't think that would be particularly fun. You know, a 2-second cast for all your spells, that doesn't really lend itself to the master of the elements firing out lightning, and lightning is fast. It's not, lightning, it's lightning, 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 you know? At least that's what it is in my eyes. A few other ideas for tweaks they could do to compensate would be on a spell-per-spell basis, and I'll talk more about ideas I have for the Shaman's particular abilities in other videos. I do have some of those coming up. Scenario number 4. The Elemental Shaman receives a complete overhaul in the way that it plays. This could be extremely exciting, as it means that almost anything could come out of Blizzard's hat. I won't speculate as to what I think will happen. Instead, I'll speculate on what I would like to see. If I had the opportunity to redesign the Elemental Shaman from the ground up, this is a rough idea of what I would do. I haven't put a huge amount of considered thought into this, and I know it has a couple of holes. It's just a rough idea. Firstly, when it comes to theme, I would make the Elemental Shaman focus on totems. At least much more than they are right now. I would entirely redesign totems as well. First of all, I would have a totem belt that works kind of like trap launcher for hunters. When toggled off, when you place a totem down, it would, instead of being placed in the world, be activated on your totem belt, and its effect would move around with you. So you'd have a searing totem that fires from your belt, a grounding totem whose effect is around you, things like that. Then you could toggle on the totem belt to move your totems to a specific location, much like totemic projection does right now. If you then deactivated the totem belt, the totems would reappear on your character and their effects would move with you again. I'd also add a new mechanic to the class that had their totems interacting in special ways if they used the shock spell on them, to combine elements together to destroy their enemies and aid their allies. The 4 shock spells are Earth Shock, Flame Shock, Frost Shock, and Wind Shear. So let's say if you used a shock spell on a totem, the cooldown of the shock would be reset, which would avoid the serious clipping of shock cooldowns that Elemental already suffers from. But there could be some kind of lockout period where you couldn't shock a totem again for a few seconds. Let's go over some examples of what I mean when I say shock a totem. So let's take the default Searing Totem and say it works with shocks. If you used Earth Shock on the Searing Totem, it would, for a few seconds, activate and duplicate your Molten Earth Mastery, so it would fire off fiery spikes of earth just like you were. If you used Flame Shock on it, it could fire off a few globs of liquid magma. Not enough to replace the talent, but enough that every few seconds you could fire off some AoE if you wanted to. If you used Wind Shear on it, the Searing Totem would fire its searing bolts out at a much faster rate for a few seconds. If you used Frost Shock, the totem would explode, despawn, and deal damage to nearby enemies. Opposite elements don't work together, right? There could be a huge amount of potential interactions here. If you Wind Sheared a Capacitor Totem, it could explode immediately. If you Earth Shocked a Tremor Totem, it would taunt all nearby enemies and make it absorb damage. If you Frost Shocked a Healing Totem, it would apply a heal over time to everyone nearby. If you Earth Shocked a Stone Bulwark Totem, you would get a few seconds of immunity. Things like that. Through this totem system, you could open up a huge amount of interesting variety of abilities that newer players wouldn't necessarily have to learn and memorize to still do the core damage rotation, and still be okay at the class. The technology already exists for this, just look at the Mage's Prismatic Crystal. So this could be a thing that happens. It likely won't, but I think it would be cool to focus more on totems like this. It's just a random idea. There are a lot of things wrong with shamans right now. I mean, the talent system doesn't work. Shocks in general could just be removed, because if you look at the tier bonuses for Warlords of Draenor, every single one has been about shocks. So, like, I think that just removing them might be an idea as well. This is just a random idea I had. So, there you go. I'm sure everyone has their own little random ideas. Finally, scenario number 5, perhaps the most interesting and potentially most dangerous solution. The Elemental Shaman is renamed, reworked, and retooled to become a tanking spec. This would really surprise me, to be honest, but there are rumors here and there that could happen. A lot of players have wanted a Shaman tanking spec for a while, but considering the new Demon Hunter class can tank, I would be really surprised if this were the case. But it could happen. It won't. I'd be really surprised. But it's a possibility. So, what do you think about the removal of Multistrike? What do you think it means for the Elemental Shaman? Let me know in the comments. I'm excited to see what's going to happen, and I hope this is the herald of a new and exciting Shaman class that can be more competitive with its peers, and with a greater class fantasy to it. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.